Newcastle United possess a condition rare in professional football. They are afraid of being ahead. Not afraid of losing a lead, afraid of the psychological state that accompanies having won. St. James Park confirmed on Saturday what the numbers have been documenting all season. This football club suffers from a specific phobia. The phobia activates the moment they establish advantage. The trigger is not external pressure or opponent quality. The trigger is internal, the burden of expectation that arrives with control. 13 points dropped from winning positions. Joint highest in the Premier League this season. That statistic is not fluctuation or circumstance. It is diagnosis. When a team repeatedly fails to protect advantages across different opponents, different circumstances, different tactical setups, the common variable is not football. It is psychology. Most teams fear being behind. They fear the pressure of needing to score, the anxiety of chasing a match, the diminishing time creating urgency. Standard competitive anxiety. Newcastle United have developed the opposite pathology. They fear being ahead. The moment they establish control, a transformation begins. Not tactical. Psychological. The transformation operates through stages. First comes hyper-awareness. Players become conscious of the scoreboard in ways they were not when level. Decisions begin filtering through the question, will this protect what we have? That question poisons instinct. Instinct says press. Question says conserve. Instinct says attack space. Question says defend space. Instinct says impose. Question says survive. The filtration process creates hesitation. Milliseconds of delay between thought and action. In professional football, milliseconds determine outcomes. A pass arrives half a second late. A press begins a step too slow. A run into space occurs after the space has closed. The timing that created the advantage deteriorates because the mind is asking questions the body should be answering automatically. Stage 2 involves spatial retreat. Not coached. Not instructed. Organic. Players occupy positions 5 yards deeper than they occupied when creating the advantage. The retreat feels rational. More bodies between ball and goal. Shorter distances to cover. Better defensive shape. But spatial retreat surrenders territory. Territory surrender invites pressure. Pressure creates mistakes. Mistakes create goals. The retreat happens collectively. No single player decides to drop. But each player making micro-adjustments based on anxiety creates macro-transformation. The team shape that suffocated opponents suddenly has gaps. The pressing structure that forced errors suddenly has escape routes. The territorial dominance that controlled the match suddenly becomes territorial submission, hoping the opponent lacks quality to exploit it. Stage 3 is tempo manipulation. The team with the lead begins slowing the game. Safe passes. Lateral movement. Conserving possession without progressing it. The logic appears sound. Control the ball, control the clock. But tempo reduction gives opponents time to reorganize. Time to adjust tactically. Time to build pressure without counter-attacking risk. The team trying to manage time by slowing the game gives their opponent the one resource they need most, time. Stage 4 arrives when anxiety becomes visible. Body language shifts. Shoulders drop. Eyes scan for danger rather than opportunity. Communication becomes defensive instructions rather than attacking encouragement. The crowd senses it. The opponent senses it. Everyone in the stadium understands what is happening except the 11 players trying to prevent it. This psychological sequence does not require opponent quality to function. Elite teams exploit it efficiently. Average teams exploit it eventually. Poor teams exploit it given enough time. The sequence is self-inflicted. Newcastle United create the conditions for their own collapse through collective anxiety response to being ahead. The condition has become institutional. Players who arrive from other clubs absorb it within months. The anxiety lives in the training ground. in the dressing room, in the stadium atmosphere, in the collective memory of every previous collapse. New players enter an environment where protecting leads is expected to fail. That expectation becomes self-fulfilling. Eddie Howe cannot coach his way out of this problem. Tactics do not address fear. Formation changes do not cure anxiety. Substitution patterns do not rebuild confidence. The solution requires psychological intervention that professional football rarely provides. The solution requires confronting uncomfortable truth: this team is mentally weak when controlling matches. Mental weakness in football is not about effort or desire. These players want to win. They train hard. They follow instructions. They care about results. Mental weakness is about response patterns under specific pressure. The pressure of being ahead triggers a response pattern that guarantees failure. The pattern has repeated enough times to become automatic. Automatic responses bypass conscious thought. Players collapse leads before they realize they are collapsing them. Consider what this reveals about ambition ceilings. Teams that cannot protect leads cannot win championships. League titles require grinding victories when playing poorly. Surviving pressure when opponents dominate possession but you lead by 1. Finding the goal that kills a match when defending an advantage. None of those championship requirements exist in this team's psychological toolkit. Cup competitions expose the same limitation. Knockout football rewards teams that can manage narrow advantages across 90 minutes. That requires comfort in discomfort. Newcastle United are comfortable only when dominating or when chasing. The middle state, protecting a lead while under pressure, creates paralysis. The consequence is permanent mid-table status regardless of talent. The squad contains players capable of competing in top 6. The coaching staff has proven competence. The stadium provides genuine home advantage when the team performs. But none of those factors matter when psychology prevents the team from completing matches they control. This condition creates a specific kind of football purgatory. Good enough to dominate matches. Not strong enough to win them. The gap between performance and result becomes permanent. Talented players produce impressive individual displays that amount to nothing. Supporters watch their team control opponents for extended periods before inevitably surrendering points. The frustration intensifies because the problem is invisible to traditional analysis. Tactical reviews show the team executed the game plan. Statistical analysis shows they created chances and controlled territory. Video review shows no obvious errors or systemic failures. The collapse happens in the space between what players are instructed to do and what fear makes them do instead. Chelsea's contribution to this match was patience. Nothing more. They did not need tactical brilliance or individual excellence. They needed only to remain present while their opponent self-destructed. The visitors understood what was happening before the hosts did. They recognized the anxiety signals, the spatial retreat, the tempo reduction, the body language shift. They simply waited for the inevitable. That represents perhaps the most damning element of this condition. Opponents have learned to expect it. Teams arriving at St. James Park know the strategy. Survive the early pressure. Absorb the intensity. Wait for Newcastle to take the lead. Then watch them collapse. The strategy succeeds with disturbing regularity because the psychological pattern is reliable. The home crowd participates in the anxiety cycle. St. James Park transforms from advantage to liability once the team takes the lead. The stadium that roars during periods of dominance becomes silent theatre of dread during periods of protection. Every opposition attack creates collective intake of breath. Every defensive clearance receives nervous applause. The supporters expect disaster because they have witnessed this pattern repeatedly. That crowd anxiety feeds back into player psychology. Athletes are not immune to atmospheric pressure. When 50,000 people in the stadium expect you to collapse, their expectation becomes part of your psychological burden. The weight increases. The anxiety intensifies. The collapse accelerates. Breaking this cycle requires something professional football rarely permits: admission of psychological fragility. The team needs to acknowledge they are afraid of being ahead. The coaching staff needs to admit tactical preparation cannot solve this problem. The club needs to invest in psychological rehabilitation before technical development. But admission of weakness conflicts with professional sport culture. Athletes are trained to project confidence regardless of internal reality. Coaches are evaluated on tactical acumen, not psychological insight. Clubs invest in physical conditioning and technical training while treating mental preparation as supplementary rather than foundational. So the pattern continues. Match after match. Season after season. Different players. Same outcome. The condition becomes defining characteristic. Newcastle United, the team that cannot protect leads. That identity becomes burden that makes protecting leads even harder. The cycle deepens. The alternative path requires uncomfortable honesty. This team needs to stop trying to protect leads and start trying to extend them. The mentality shift from defense to offense when ahead. The commitment to maintaining attacking intensity regardless of scoreline. The willingness to risk conceding while trying to score rather than risk conceding while trying to survive. But that shift requires trust. Trust that attacking when ahead will not expose defensive vulnerability. Trust that intensity can be sustained for 90 minutes. Trust that the team possesses mental resilience to absorb pressure without collapsing. None of that trust exists currently. Trust is not created through instruction. Trust is built through experience. This team's experience teaches them to expect failure when ahead. Consider the long-term trajectory. Where does a team with this psychological profile end? Not relegation, the talent prevents that. Not European competition, the mentality prevents that. Permanent residence in the undefined middle of the Premier League table. Good enough to beat poor teams. Not strong enough to beat good teams. Incapable of grinding results when performing poorly. That destination represents waste. Waste of talent. Waste of home advantage. Waste of coaching quality. Waste of supporter passion. All sacrificed to psychological fragility that professional football refuses to acknowledge exists. The match at St. James Park did not create this problem. It revealed it. Again. The revelation will be ignored. Again. Post-match analysis will focus on tactical adjustments that might have changed the outcome. Personnel decisions that could have provided different results. Individual errors that proved costly. All legitimate topics. All irrelevant to the actual problem. The actual problem lives between the ears of every player who takes the pitch wearing Newcastle United colours. The problem is fear. Fear of the burden that comes with being ahead. Fear of the expectation that accompanies control. Fear of the responsibility to finish what they started. Until that fear receives treatment, nothing changes. The talent means nothing. The tactics mean nothing. The home advantage means nothing. Fear wins every time. Final verdict: Newcastle United have 13 different examples this season proving the same truth. They are not afraid of losing, they are afraid of winning, and that makes them incapable of doing either.